The theology of Saint Gregory Palamas stands at the heart of Orthodox Christian anthropology, soteriology, and mystical theology. Palamism does not represent a novelty or a rupture from patristic tradition, but the preservation and articulation of the ancient Christian experience of the divine. Roman Catholic criticisms of Palamism, whether metaphysical, doctrinal, or historical, stem from different presuppositions regarding divine simplicity, grace, human participation in God, and the nature of theological knowledge. From the Orthodox standpoint, the Palamite synthesis faithfully expresses the mind of the Fathers, the experience of the saints, and the dogmatic boundaries necessary to preserve the possibility of true communion with God. 1. The essence-energies distinction as patristic and necessary. Roman Catholic critiques often assert that the essence-energies distinction introduces composition into God or divides the divine nature. From the Orthodox perspective, this rests on a misunderstanding of Palamas' terms. The distinction is real, but not between parts, it is between what God is in himself, essence, and how God manifests himself and communicates his life, energies. The energies are God himself, not created intermediaries or accidents. This distinction did not originate with Palamas but is rooted in the earlier Fathers. Basil the Great distinguishes God's essence, unknowable, from his energies, knowable in creation and revelation. Gregory of Nyssa speaks of experiencing God's operations without comprehending his essence. Maximus the Confessor articulates the divine logoi as real expressions of God's will and life. Thus, Palamas is not introducing a metaphysical innovation, he is clarifying the patristic method of protecting both God's transcendence and his immanence. Without such a distinction, Orthodox theologians argue, one is driven either to agnosticism, if God is utterly transcendent, or to pantheism, if divine transcendence is collapsed into immanence. 2. Preserving the possibility of theosis. Orthodoxy insists that salvation is not merely forensic or moral, but ontological participation in the uncreated life of God. Roman Catholic theology, however, typically identifies divine grace as created, a quality or habitus instilled by God in the soul. The Orthodox critique is straightforward: created grace cannot deify. If the grace by which humanity is saved is a creature, then humanity does not truly participate in God but in something external to him. But the New Testament describes salvation as participation in the divine nature, 2 Peter 1 verse 4. For the Orthodox, this requires uncreated divine energies, anything less collapses the meaning of theosis. Palamas' synthesis makes deification possible while maintaining divine transcendence. The Roman alternative, identifying grace with the divine essence or reducing it to a created effect, either denies the possibility of union with God or collapses the distinction between creator and creature. 3. The nature of divine simplicity. Roman Catholic critiques often state that Palamism violates divine simplicity by distinguishing between essence and energies. But Palamas' understanding of simplicity is rooted in the Fathers, not in later scholastic metaphysics. Orthodox theology affirms God's simplicity, however, it rejects the Thomistic philosophical formulation that would identify divine essence with all divine attributes, acts, and operations. The Orthodox critique is not that Thomas Aquinas was irrational or impious, but that his Aristotelian metaphysical categories are foreign to the patristic apophatic method. For Palamas, God is simple, not because all distinctions collapse into his essence, but because God is not composite in any created sense. The divine energies are not parts of God, they are God's life in its outward mode of existence. Thus, the Orthodox defense of Palamism insists that Roman Catholic metaphysics imposes an alien philosophical framework on Trinitarian and mystical theology, resulting in a theological system insufficiently rooted in the experimental dimension of Christian prayer. 4. The hesychast experience as normative. Orthodox theology is fundamentally experimental. The Palamite councils affirmed that the saints truly behold the uncreated light, a manifestation of God's energies. Roman Catholic objections often argue that all created vision must be mediated by created forms, thus, the hesychastic vision cannot be uncreated. From the Orthodox viewpoint, this critique fails to appreciate the nature of contemplative prayer and the testimony of the saints. The uncreated light manifested at the Transfiguration is not a creature. The saints who behold this light do so by the purification of the heart, not by created intermediaries. Palamism simply clarifies the mechanics of this experience in continuity with earlier mystical writers such as Pseudo-Dionysius and Maximus the Confessor. For orthodoxy, theology divorced from the experience of the saints becomes abstract speculation. Palamism preserves the experimental core of Christian revelation. 5. The ecumenical authority of the Palamite councils. Orthodox Christianity considers the Palamite councils of the 14th century, especially those of 1341, 1347, and 1351, as ecumenical in authority, even if not formally counted among the original 7 councils. They were received by the entire Orthodox Church, shaped Orthodox liturgical life, and defined dogma on the nature of grace, theosis, and divine, human communion. Rome's rejection of Palamism is therefore, from the Orthodox viewpoint, a rejection of a conciliar, Catholic, and patristic expression of the Christian faith. Palamism is not a local controversy or theological opinion, it is normative dogma. Conclusion. From the Orthodox Christian perspective, Palamism represents the faithful articulation of the ancient experience of the Church, not an innovation or rupture. It preserves the apophatic tradition, makes theosis possible, safeguards divine transcendence, and remains fully consistent with the teachings of the Fathers. Roman Catholic objections arise not from patristic disagreements but from differing theological presuppositions, particularly regarding divine simplicity, grace, and the role of philosophical systems in theology. In defending Palamism, orthodoxy defends the very heart of its understanding of salvation, participation in the uncreated life of God, made possible through the divine energies, revealed in the saints, and affirmed by the Church.